Okay, so I think I talked about roles a little bit, but I want to bring it up again just to make sure that it is fresh on our brains and that you are able to make a note so that you'll be familiar when you see it again on your exam for testing purposes. So a role is a set of expectations slash norms about a social position, defining how those in the position are to behave. And so we have all types of roles that we play. One person may play 15, 10, 5 different roles. I have the role of a mother. I have the role of a wife. I have the role of I guess, being a person in a leadership position. I have a role as a student myself. I have a role as a granddaughter. We have all kinds of roles, all types of roles that we play, and we adjust for those particular roles in a way that we feel like we ought to act in that particular role. So, as a mother, it's certain things that I do or certain ways that I carry myself um, in that particular role because I have a certain respect for that role. I have a certain idea in my head of how that role should be played out. And my idea of how that role should look, should act, and all of those other components that go along with it is based on my views and how I've been affected by nature and nurture. What I've seen and what I've observed of how that role was modeled for me as a child, as a young adult, as a adolescent, as an adult, and how society portrays it, or how I want to portray it, or make adjustments. Okay, so that's just one role, and so what Philip Zimbardo, the reason why you see Zimbardo's prison study, this study focused on roles and how in our minds we conform to what that role looks like based on our perception, which was a very controversial study. I'll provide you all with the video link within the classroom so that you all can see it. But it's really, really good information, and it shows you how you can take a normal, and normal is, I don't know if that's the word I want to use because we all have some abnormality to us, but how you can take a person that in a different environment, kind of their natural habitat, how this person would function, how they would act, and it would be very, very different from how they acted in these roles. So, what happened with Philip Zimbardo's prison experiment was that it was called the Stanford Prison Simulation Study. And this was done at Stanford University. And what he did was he converted a, what was this space? I want to say it may have been a psych lab. I think it was like a psychology lab or something. It was kind of at the bottom of the building. And what he did was he converted that area at Stanford University to look like a jail. And so it had bars, and for one of the clauses, they used that as like kind of a person getting put in a hole and all kinds of things. So he converted this area in Stanford University as a jail because this is going to be a part of his experiment. And so throughout the experiment, it truly showed the power of a situation and how we act with roles. So he took a group of people, he advertised this in the kind of local newspaper of how he was looking to pay certain individuals some money to be a part of this experiment. And so I'll say, just for lack of time, and this may not be the accurate number, but I'll say he took like 20 to 24 people. And so from that group of people, he split that group in half, and half of the group were prisoners and half of the group were guards. And for the group that were prisoners, he actually had them get picked up by a police officer from their home. Their thumbprint, kind of got their thumbprint, took a picture of them, gave them a inmate number, just kind of fulfilling the whole role of what what it looks like, what it feels like, to some degree, to be a inmate. And the guards got guard uniforms and badges and those shades that the guards wear, kind of those older dated movies, because this was done in 1972. And so you had people that in a different situation could have been even friends, but yet just because of the role or the position that they were in at this time for this experiment, was very, very different. You had the guards, some of the guards being very, very nasty to the prisoners, to some point, like almost abusing them, cursing at them, making them clean the toilet with their toothbrush, degrading them, saying all kinds of things to them. Very, very, very a harsh kind of mentality of how they were treating these people. And this was all for an experiment. And they weren't getting paid a great deal of money either, but it was just how they kind of took on the role. And then you had the prisoners that were kind of rioting against the guards. And how, some of them were, "Get me out of here," and, using some explicitives and things of that nature. But to the point where they had to end the experiment because it was getting out of control. And some people are still kind of traumatized by the event, that were a part of the study still to this day. So if you have an opportunity, definitely take a look at Philip Zimbardo's Stanford Prison experiment. Now here we have the cognitive dissonance theory. And so what the cognitive dissonance theory is all about is how our thoughts don't align with our actions, to kind of put it in a nutshell. So cognitive dissonance occurs when a person holds a belief that's contradictory. It can be a belief, it can be an idea, it can be a value, but it contradicts how they really feel and is experienced as a psychological stress when they actually engage and participate in an action that goes against their core beliefs. And so let's see here. So for an example of cognitive dissonance, you may have a person that, I guess for a lack of better words, or a great example, you may have a person, and you'll ask this person, do you think that smoking truly causes cancer, causes lung cancer? And the person will say, especially if it's a person that is just kind of functioning on the earth, of course they would say most likely, yeah, I believe that smoking is definitely, a contributor to lung cancer. And if they want to dive even deeper, they may back it up with some supporting details or some supporting facts or whatever. And then that person smokes cigarettes. That's an example of cognitive dissonance. You know that the cigarettes is playing a contributing role in your untimely death. You know it is killing you inevitably, okay? Possibility, very, very strong possibility that it is killing you, it is taking years off of your life, but yet you smoke a cigarette. And a lot of times what will happen with those that have cognitive dissonance, they'll try to justify their actions kind of right after. And so they'll say, yeah, I smoke cigarettes, but, it helps alleviate stress, or, I don't smoke that much, I only smoke this. So they'll go and try to justify their actions, although it's not aligned, because they believe one thing, they know one thing to be true, but yet they're involved in another. And so that explains the cognitive dissonance theory. So be familiar with that. All right, norms. All right. As we see here, rules for expected and acceptable behavior, influence, and power. I'm sorry. I'm continuing on. I'm like, that doesn't look like the definition. So norms, definition for norms, rules for expected and acceptable behavior. All right. So for example, a norm in Western culture is that we don't walk around naked. We are actually clothed individuals. And so when we go somewhere, when people see us out, we have on clothes. If we see something like that that is outside of what our norm is, that's why we would consider it abnormal. All right. If you go to a different country and in that country, they don't wear clothes. They may wear something else. They may be totally naked. That's the norm for their culture. We would be the ones if we go over there fully clothed, and not saying that you need to take your clothes off, but I'm just saying if we go to their country fully clothed, we would stand out like a sore thumb because we look abnormal to them because we are following our Western culture norms, not their norms for their culture. All right, and then culture. Behaviors, ideas, attitudes, values, and traditions that a group of people share and is transmitted from one generation to the next. Okay, so be familiar with norms, how they're defined, and culture. All right, we have some cultural influences. You can just kind of read over some of those cultural influences. Conformity. Want you to be familiar with conformity. Conformity is going to focus on how we adjust our behavior. So the definition, and make sure you're familiar with this, for conformity is adjusting our behavior or our thinking so that it coincides with what is considered the group standard. Okay? And this is typically done in group settings. Okay? Some examples of a group setting would be in a classroom where you may have 75 to 80% of the student population answering a question wrong. And because the person that is thinking that because the majority is saying this, they will think that their answer is wrong as well, when yet they could have the correct answer. They end up conforming, putting their hand down, and then kind of changing the answer based on what the group, what the majority stated. You see this also in juries. You see this with friends, and you see this at work. But this is a big deal a lot of times in the emergence of adolescents, especially when they are struggling. You have adolescents that are struggling with identity issues for themselves. If they're not kind of solid on who they are and what their identity is, then they conform to what they like, who they may feel even pressured or threatened by, who they feel respect for. They'll adjust and conform to that particular group or person or whatever because they feel like, well, this is my way in. I'm not even sure of who I am anyway. So this must be right. This feels right because it's something that I respect. It's something that I like. It seems like it's the best because it's the majority. They just kind of go along with it. And so conformity could be very dangerous too, because it's just kind of like a pack of sheep just kind of being hoarded and led when you don't have a true individual that is emerging saying, I'm different. This is what I think. This is what I like. And so you have to be very, very careful with conformity, especially in adolescents and young adults, and really trying to promote individuality. But you can also be a part of a group, but don't lose yourself within that group. And so important things to kind of think about. Now, as we talk about conformity, it takes us to an experiment that was done, which was another controversial experiment, which is the Stanley. What's this, Stanley? No, this wasn't Stanley Milgram. This was Asch. Sorry, this was Asch's conformity experiment, where what he did was, now these two guys here, this guy, that guy, they're in on this experiment. And what Asch is trying to see is, could I get the third person to conform to what the group think, what they think, based on their answers, and kind of like majority rules. So that makes that particular person become uncomfortable. They're questioning their thought process, they're questioning their answers. And then if they're really not certain for a great deal of what the answer is, what the response should be, kind of what's the intention here, and very sure of themselves, they'll just conform to what the group says. And so with this experiment, these guys were shown what was considered the standard line. And then based on the standard line, they were supposed to choose which line out of these three was close to or exactly like the standard line. And so these guys in this group answered 3. And because they're answering 3, it's like 3, what do you think? 3, what do you think? Okay, 3 for you too. Okay, now it gets to this guy here, and he is annoyed. He is a bit confused looking, and he's not understanding. You can see there's some level of distress where he's not understanding how in the world are they saying 3 when it's very clear the line that's closest to that is 2. And so because of this, you could get a person to conform to it because majority rules, okay? So they'll just go along with the group. This is another example of conformity. All right, let's get into normative social influence and informational social influence. Just like it's stated here, conforms to avoid rejection or because they want social approval from the group. This would be what we would typically call like peer pressure. You're smoking because your friend is smoking. You're drinking because your friend is drinking. You're trying this drug because your friend said try it. And so I don't want to look like this. I don't want to seem like this. So I don't want to go against the group. So I'll indulge. All right. Informational social influence accepts others' opinions about reality. But really a better definition for that is this is the type of influence that results from a person being willing to accept others' opinions as new information. And so this is a tricky kind of influence or conformity type, because you are accepting this because you have a feeling about the particular individual that you're conforming to. So if you thought the smartest person, if you thought this guy, okay, the teacher asks a question and this guy answers the question, and because this guy gets 90s and 100s on the test, and because the guy answers the question in one particular way, you think, of course, then, oh, well, it must be right because he's very smart. I value his opinion, so I'm going to write down what he said too. And then you're amazed when his answer was wrong, but your answer was right. You were influenced because you thought that this particular person had a greater knowledge level or intelligence level on something in particular, so you just conform to it because it must be right if they said it. And so that's the type of informational social influence. These are some reasons why people are more likely to conform. They feel incompetent or insecure. So, hey, I feel like that person knows it better, or the group knows the situation better. I'll just go along with it. In a group with at least 3 people, especially a group in which everyone else agrees, you don't want to be the standout. Admire The group status and attractiveness. I like the group. I may think it's wrong, but I want to be a part of that group because I'm attracted to that group. You don't have any prior commitment to any response, so hey, whatever everybody else said, I'm cool with it. Excuse me. Know that others in the group will observe their behavior, and you are from a culture that encourages you to respect what's considered the social standard. You go along with it, you don't make trouble, and therefore you conform, whether it's right or wrong. All right, social thinking, social influence here, continuation. This is about the Stanley Milgram experiment. Very controversial experiment. So in this experiment, these individuals that were basically pushing the buttons for the electrical shocks, which weren't true electrical shocks that were being given, but the electrical shocks were to be given to a person that on the other end that was considered a participant in this experiment as well. They were to answer the questions correctly, and if they didn't, then they were going to be shocked. And you were given these instructions if you were the person that was administering the shock to the other person. If you were given these orders, in which you would be, by what they considered a legitimate authority figure, they continued to administer the shocks, even if they heard the people screaming, crying, yelling, saying, "You're killing me," because they couldn't see these people on the other side. They could only hear them when they were administering the so-called shocks. But the individuals that were on the other side were also in on the experiment as well. So they just kind of played along. But what it showed was that people are willing to go to significant lengths to agree and obey based on a social influence. One guy, even in the experiment, thought he was killing the person that he was shocking because the guy said, "I have a bad heart," and then he just stopped responding, stopped screaming altogether. He thought he killed him. But yet, because the authority figure in the room, which was the, I think it was the lab, kind of a lab assistant, or the researcher, supposedly it was supposed to be the researcher, was telling the individual, continue asking your questions. If they don't answer, you give them a shock. This is after the guy is thinking that he already killed a man. And he's trying to, explain, "Hey, man, I think he's in there dead. And he already said he had a bad heart. Doesn't matter. Keep going." And he kept going with it. And so it was, man, that was very disturbing to see how a person will continue with something, even if they know it's wrong, but in order to obey an authority figure, it didn't matter to them. All right, so you can just kind of read about that. Victim was depersonalized or at a distance. That was a person they couldn't see. Authority figure was supported by powerful or prestigious institution. Hey, you're in the research. I'm the researcher or research assistant. You have to do what I say. And so I'll provide a video for that as well. Group behavior. I want to talk about social loafing and group think. So social loafing is the tendency for people in a group to exert less effort when pooling their efforts toward attaining a common goal than when they are going to be held accountable as an individual. And you see this occur a lot in like group projects. This is why students don't like group projects. Some of the issues that occur as a part of social loafing is that the person is less accountable because they only have one part, and typically those are kind of smaller parts. As a part of their group, the individual doesn't feel like their contribution matters very much, or they're just a slacker and they're slacking off and getting a free ride off of others, especially if you're in a group that, the group is a group of people that work really hard and really, want to attain very high grades. Hey, if I don't do anything, it doesn't matter because they're going to do it anyway because they don't want their grade messed up. So those are some of the reasons why social loafing occur. Group think. This is a mode or a type of thinking that occurs when the desire for harmony within a decision-making group overrides a realistic appraisal of alternatives. This is kind of self-censoring yourself, and you're doing a self-censor because you want to do what's best for the greater good of the group. All right, that's group think. All right, and you can just kind of read over that information. These were just some good good information, some good components and stats that were provided within the presentation, so I didn't want to remove them. All right, prejudice. Be familiar with prejudice, unjustifiable and a usually negative attitude toward a group and its member. Prejudices occur in so many different things. It is not just race. It can be in sex. It can be in education. It can be in so many different things. And so I always tell students to kind of think outside of the box when you're thinking about prejudices, because it's not just strictly related to kind of color of your skin. All right. Another term I want you to be familiar with is going to be stereotype. So a stereotype is a widely held but fixed and oversimplified idea of a particular type of person or thing. And so we have all types of stereotypes. You see a tall person, you ask them, do they play basketball? You see a person that wears glasses, you may think that the person is intelligent. You see, certain individuals driving. You have stereotypes of women. Women can't drive. That's a stereotype. So there are all types of stereotypes. Some prejudices just kind of continued here. Gender prejudice, LGBTQ prejudices, belief system prejudices. So kind of got to get out of the box when we think about prejudices. Some of the roots of prejudice that I want us to be familiar with is going to be the just world phenomenon, which is good is rewarded and evil is punished. And we know that's not always necessarily true. The in-group, it is about us. All right, people with whom we share a common identity. Out-group is them. Those perceived as different or apart from our group. And then in-group bias is when we favor our own group. Okay. All right. Scapegoat theory proposes that when something goes wrong, we find someone to blame so that they can be our outlet for anger. So we've heard the term scapegoat, but this is just the theory. So, for instance, if you have a disagreement with your supervisor, with your boss, and yet you go home and you're fussing and yelling at the top of your lungs to your family and putting your kids on punishment because they left a toy on the floor, that's a scapegoat. That's an example of the scapegoat theory. All right, aggression, be familiar with that term. Any physical or verbal behavior intended. The intent is to harm someone, whether it is done out of hostility or you've calculated the means to an end. Okay. Physical attractiveness, just FYI, but what they're stating here is that kind of how society sees things is that what is beautiful is considered good, and that's not true. All right. Passionate love, just FYI, you can kind of read over that. That's talking about the two-factor theory as well. Romantic love, you can kind of read over that, FYI, as well. Altruism, definitely want you to be familiar with. An unselfish concern for the welfare of others. So you may be on your way home with 1,000 things to do, but yet you see someone on the side of the road that needs help, and you stop to do it just simply because I want to help this person out. Not look for anything in return. I want to help this person out, then I can go on about my way going home. That's an act of altruism. Unselfish acts of kindness, basically, without seeking a reward. The bystander effect, I'm going to want you to be familiar with bystander effect. This is the tendency for any given bystander to be less likely to give aid if other bystanders are present. And what this really boils down to is a diffusion of responsibility. And I'm going to provide you all a video on Kitty Genovese that's all about the bystander effect and how she was murdered over and over and over. Well, not murdered over and over and over again, but attacked over and over and over again until she died because people assumed that someone else was calling the police to get her help. And kind of like, I didn't want to get involved. I thought somebody else was going to do it. So make sure you review that video about her. And that pretty much concludes chapter 12.